Welcome to the Trachtenberg School's Career Catalyst on the reality of corporate social responsibility and alternative career paths with Trachtenberg alum, Dr. John Feuer, who is the director of the Institute for Corporate Responsibility at GW School of Business. And again, as I said, a Trachtenberg alum. I am thrilled to have you share your insights today, John. As Melissa, my colleague, and I can attest, we hear a lot of people have interest in CSR and understanding what that world really looks like. So to have someone with your expertise is always fantastic. For those of you who've been a part of our Career Catalyst before, we have our expert, either faculty or alumni, share for a little part of it, and then we open it up to Q&A. So you'll have an opportunity to type in questions, or if you're in a place where you want to ask your own questions. But you all are here to listen to John, not to me. So I am going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. As I think Denise may have mentioned, when she first asked me, I kind of paused because I said, well, I'm not going to have very many positive things to say. And so maybe that's not so good. But she thought it was still a good idea to at least share what I'm seeing and maybe, some thoughts about where people are in the program given what's going on out there. So I have a few observations. But then, would really like to be driven by your questions and, what you're thinking about and all that. Well, as for CSR, it's kind of a funny field because it seems to dominate so much of the conversation about corporations, but there's very few people who work in the CSR offices, right? Sometimes they're called sustainability offices or CSR and all that. But for a large corporation that might have 11,000 employees, they might have 2.5 people. So that's just right there. That tells you, quite a bit. And I also think in some offices, if you're looking or if a job comes open, it depends on how that company sees the role and the function of that CSR office. And the two main ones I would say is that there is a strategic role that it plays with the company, right? Helping to understand what some of those issues are, stakeholders, emerging issues, and incorporate them into the corporate strategy and operations. And the other side is compliance, which means you're answering survey forms all day long, or you're, dealing with letters and communications coming from people that have to do. And so it's worth noting different firms will give a different emphasis on one or the other. And so depending on your interests, you may want to keep that in mind when you start to get one. I do think it's fair to say that companies, it may not be so much that they're pulling back on their CSR activities because of the environment. Most companies usually make a business case around what it is they're going to do and spend money on. And for CSR, a lot of that is around stakeholder management. And so the stakeholders haven't changed too much. And if it was a good idea to do before, then it probably, you might imagine it's still good. But what I do think is changing is because the government is really pulling back on enforcing compliance in some of these areas, then the corporations will just naturally also kind of lighten up, right? Because the compliance and the reporting doesn't get them any money. What it can get them is good comms. So there is a linkage often between CSR and the communications office. But to be honest, the communications office can do it all on their own if they really want to. So I think this feeling of the corporations that kind of the people are letting up a little bit, there'll just be a little less urgency on doing that reporting, on doing that data collection. Maybe there's some group out there collecting data on some issue. I don't know, maybe it's related to their supply chains and sustainability. Maybe the company's just not quite feeling the urgency to fill out that one as much, as it might have before. So I'd say that's kind of what's going on out there. But at the same time, there's always the business government relations office. That's not changing. You'll always have the companies who want to be there and get involved. And I think, I don't know, maybe a little paradoxically, now is the time when companies are really gearing up, whether it's direct or through an association, because there are changes that you can get made, right? This administration has an open ear for people who, right, are part of the system, as opposed to a gridlock, right? Not through passing bills, but through getting, um, interpretations done within the agencies and actions. So business government relations is still moving along in an active area. You also find that there's well, kind of the good news, bad news. Bad news first, there's just this huge pool of people out there who have been let go or retired. So there's just tough competition when you're thinking about if I'm going to apply for a job. There's a lot of really talented, experienced people out there in that area. But what I have been hearing is that those same people trying to figure out themselves how to get a job, they've kind of created what we might call like development advisory firms, a little bit analogous to a financial advisory firm, right? Who will come in and you pay them and they'll tell you what to do with the investments, what's smart, right? How does it fit your goals and all that stuff. So they're an advisory firm. And I'm hearing people who have set up their own companies believing that their program knowledge, that their networks, that their experience in country, that they can translate that into some cash and some revenue off of advisory services with corporations. I think it's a little challenging for companies in the international space because in part they're doing it, well, in part they're doing it because there is a CSR component, but it's mostly, they want to be in the countries where there's markets, whether it's now or future markets. And they want to be promoting their brand and they want to be understanding market and market entry and right, all sorts of business side things. So they're there, but they're often there under a CSR umbrella. But those efforts, and kind of the point I'm getting to, is usually or commonly linked with some government grant, whether from the US or the UK or the Nordics or Germany, France, someone has put some grant money in there, and then the companies are kind of working and coordinating and working with them, at least in some way. So now that that government money is pulled back, it's a real challenge for some of the corporations to figure out, okay, how do we keep moving, right? Because they kind of relied on that government money, and not just the money, but the structure and the organization and the operations, and then you could kind of jump in. So I do think some of those advising development companies are trying to help people figure out what to do next. So, that's another area. And then maybe the last one I'll mention, because this is kind of an area I've been spending a lot of time on, is this impact investing space. And more, you're just seeing firms and investors looking for opportunities in the impact investing space, which is, if you hadn't heard the term, basically it's in investments that not just think about the money and the financial return, but they also intentionally are providing a social, environmental, positive outcome. They're doing that, I would say. The motivation is because there's people out there who have capital, are putting it aside, want to invest it, and they want those impacts. It's not often that the company is doing it because they think it's a good idea. They're doing it because there's a market out there to get people's money who care about that if they can demonstrate that their investments align with that. But the work that's needed is on designing, identifying, validating, measuring, messaging, all those things that are being claimed to be the positive impact, right? And whether they align them and report them along SDGs or several other platforms that are out there for evaluating, right? The people who know how to do the investing most often don't really know much about development and growth and policy and impacts. So what you often get, which is kind of the upside, is the people who, you run into that are in impact investing firms have some background other than financial. And they may not even be directly in development, right? I mean, people I've run into, right? One was a philosophy major, one was a sociologist, one took languages, because it's a little more about being able to think analytically and think in a systems approach. And the financing, you can always kind of teach someone. And oftentimes, the firm will kind of split up. Like they need projects developed. They need opportunities with which to use their money and someone who can understand what those market opportunities are and what the social, environmental issues are and how to make money of it. But usually, once they reach a certain stage, it gets handed off to someone who just does the financial analysis. So I would say understanding that side of it, the investing side of impact investing, is useful, but I don't, if you're just casually good at doing a discounted cash flow through Excel, you're not going to be that attractive to do the financial analysis, right? They'll take someone where that's their specialty. But understanding a discounted cash flow and why it's useful and what you learn from it can help you do the development work, right? So having kind of that broader. I think that's overall what I was trying to share from what I've seen. I will say that, again, as you guys are looking at how to be useful, like I said before, there's a lot of people out there who really understand government operations, government programs, government politics, and decision making and histories. But some of those people who have been doing those jobs for 15 years, they don't understand business. They don't understand investment. They don't understand private. And so much of the work is kind of almost assumed that there's going to be some public-private partnership of some kind or some kind of an arrangement to work together. So the extent that at least you can understand kind of all sides of the equation and kind of understand, anticipate how will businesses react? How would an NGO react? Why are they doing what they're doing? As a way of trying to bring consensus and understanding of what's going to work, I think that's still a very valid skill set that people are still, looking for today, depending on not so depending on what kind of organization you're working in, but kind of understanding all sides of the equation. That still, I think, is valuable. So that's what I had to say. Glad to take any
Let's
questions.
open it up to questions. I am sure there are a lot of questions. As I said, please feel free to raise your hand or to type in questions if you have them. If you're not somewhere that you can type them in, but I am sure a lot of you have questions. So open it up. Don't be shy. This is your chance to ask somebody who's been in this field a long time. Yeah,
Oh, well, come on
Mary,
now.
great.
Come on now, not that long.
Not that long. You're seasoned, well seasoned.
Yeah, there you
Mary
go.
raised her hand, and then Bailey will get to you.
Thank you so much. I'm a student in the Certificate in Budget and Public Finance program. Came back to school because of government rifts, but really interesting to learn about about this field. And I wondered if you could say a bit more about what you've seen with these. I've also seen former colleagues who've spun off into kind of that their consulting business. Really, I'm in the arts and humanities, or I was, so they've kind of worked in that. But in terms of, have you seen successes with those people moving into a consultancy, or what are some better strategies that people have devised to connect with the business world and other areas?
Yeah.
And maybe that's too off of what you were focused on, so that's okay too.
No. I mean, I just from my own observations, I say it's a little too early. These are groups, we might consider them startups. And I think many of them, are what we would call pre-revenue startups, right? So I think they're trying to discover where the market is. They have a skill set. They have all of these assets that they can bring, but I don't think they understand well And it's only through their engagements and meetings and pitching to see how might that translate into something useful, right, for a company. But on the other hand, the smart companies, they also recognize now that there is a pool of these people with high skilled, high talents, and, probably rethinking, well, what's the best way to tap into that, expertise, and what is the relationship in terms of whether it's just hiring or working with consulting firms or hiring small firms on projects. I'm sure they're also trying to figure that out from their side. What's the best way to tap into it?
Thanks.
I think that's my cue. Hi, thank you for presenting,
Yep. Hi,
being here
Bailey.
with us today. I am wondering, so right now I work at a nonprofit in corporate engagement and stakeholder relationship management, and I was hoping to pivot into CSR in like January, and then all those roles seemed to dry up for a more entry-level position. I have a handful of years of work experience, and I'm getting an MPP, so I'm wondering if you think there is still a desire for kind of starting off level work in CSR, and if there is, what would be a strategic way to position myself for those types of jobs?
Yeah, good point. Um, the NGOs, the big in sustainability, environmental conservation NGOs, depending on their funding sources, can still be a pathway because they have their agenda of trying to engage corporations and getting them what they would consider to be getting them to do the right thing. And so having a skill set that you could be a part of the program or program design or engagement or implementation right through them. They're just a little bit different in terms of their funding sources, right? Like the Nature Conservancy or World Wildlife Fund, like they have so much money coming in, people writing them checks, right? Others, they've been more contract based. And so they're also struggling a little bit, right? Depending on those flows, and they're trying to right themselves. But I would say those big groups, well known, WRI, a few others, they'll still be around, Audubon Society, and making their pitch and entry. So, and they all need to be able to engage businesses and understand that and leverage that technique to reach and accomplish their goals. So that might be another area to look at.
Thank you. I think actually Denise just posted some sort of Audubon Society, almost corporate consulting role on the
Mhm.
T-Berg hot jobs. So thanks, Denise. I pay
We're going
attention.
to the Audubon Society on the 13th. So if you're not attended to attend, go into Handshake. We're going to be there. I remember, John, we went to EDF shortly after the first administration, and they were talking about, we were talking to people in their corporate partnerships, and they were talking about people saying how much money was flowing into them from people recognizing that the money is there to be doing these types of partnerships. It was really eye-opening. So if you're not registered for the one at the Audubon Society on the 13th, we have our alum who is the chief people officer there, and the person who's presenting is extraordinary. Is their managing director for North America.
It's great. Yeah, I would say just Denise to follow up on that. I think, those well-known NGOs and the corporations, I mean, they've really found a mutual interest in their partnerships. And to be honest, they may be partnering for different reasons. They probably have different measures of success and maybe even the outcomes, but I think they really find mutual benefit in being in these programs. So again, I don't see companies pulling out. Sometimes you see in the news where a company pulls out of some climate commitment or something like that. But I don't think in this space. I think most of the companies that are in understand the business value behind the relationship, and will stay with it. So that kind of work in between those two spaces, you would think would, continue to stick around, perhaps even grow just to try to fill in the gap from the lack of government funding addressing some of these issues, at least right now.
Great. Emil.
Hi. Thank you for putting on this event. I took a, CSR and impact investing course last summer with Professor Furshine. And the course really ignited a lot of interest for me in the impact investing space. And I'm an MPA student, and my background is more in like policy, communication, stakeholder engagement, et cetera, and not really finance and budgeting. And so I'm just curious, from your view, what kinds of roles are there in impact investing that align with with the skills acquired coming out of an MPA program?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I will say maybe just an advertisement. I mean, there's two courses I teach. One, well, in the spring, it's called Impact Investing, right, out of the business school. And now in the fall, going to be offering public-private partnerships. And that used to be in the summer. Now we're shifting it to the fall. But both of those have a pretty strong kind of a financing side of it. But to come to your question, Emil, I don't think neither of those courses have any prerequisites. I've always try to design them so you can come in knowing nothing about finance, but it's part of the reason to take the courses to learn, right? So, a classic space where you might be is both I'd say in the upfront and on the back end, right? The upfront is in the design of the project and being able to say, right, what is it supposed to do? Working on a nice theory of change, having some good outcomes that are linked to what stakeholders care about, and being able to kind of put that together. And in that space, I would also add that kind of being or feeling like you're good at kind of taking different innovative ideas and approaches and translating them into an actionable program, a fundable operation, right? I mean, that's where impact investors like are supposed to be, is that if we just keep cranking it out the way we're running the program, then like you don't need that much help, right? It's like a government funded program, right? But when you're doing the investing or from the private sector side, you want something innovative that's going to be generating more value, and clearly public value on the impact side and private value on the investing side. So that upfront understanding how to do that program design, program development, really important. And then on the back end, of course, is the evaluation of being able to monitor and manage and message and report out what it is that's being done in a way which is not just, and I'd say sometimes people pick the outcomes for a project, but without really thinking who cares about those outcomes, right? Like the project designer might, but we're not reporting for the designer, we're reporting for stakeholders. So I think there's some good work in using, your thoughts about how do I select those metrics that actually reflect what we're doing, but will resonate and be important to and will be able to be understood by the stakeholders, right? It's that kind of those would be two areas I would say within the process. But depending on your interests, right, you can always pick up your skill set on understanding business and understanding investing, and may not be at the very top of your skill set, but it's amongst the package.
Right. Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some other questions on here. This is your chance. Any questions about navigating this field? I'm going to ask one while we're waiting for people. Are there certain, and then we'll get to you, Danielle, are there certain parts of the country that if somebody, wants to be in this space that you feel like there's more energy around? Because sometimes we've been talking a lot about people that DC might not be the best place for a job market right now.
Right. Well, definitely that just because of all the people, right, that have been pushed out of, but definitely this kind of thinking of, how can you be more entrepreneurial in how you work with people to address a problem, find the funding and the financing behind it, and then put it into place, right? That kind of thing. That is definitely a kind of Washington, D.C., New York corridor and a California, corridor, right? I don't think there's any question. It's just growing more and more. I mean, I don't, there's a lot of people who either, want to promote sustainability because they care about the planet or they think they can make money doing it. But it's when you've got that drive, it's like, how am I going to find the funding and support for it with the government programs going, right? So it's a little less, I think, about what it is people might want to do, but who's going to pay for it. And when the federal government was cranking out the grants and the billions of dollars, in the 20s of billions of dollars, that became the game to get the government funding, like, of course, right? And now that's gone. And it's not, my opinion, is not coming back. So for people who are still interested in that area, it just kind of shifts your focus, maybe not so much on what are we going to do, but how are we going to find the funding? And once you have some sense of that, then that drives how you might, design.
Daniela, before we get to you, someone just asked for a clarifying, Bailey just put on there. Someone also heard Chicago was a good place. What's your sense on Chicago?
Well, I don't know specifically. I thought I saw it pop up in terms of, corporation and corporate headquarters. I mean, if it's looking for a job in CSR with a company, then yeah, then you try to look of where are some of those headquarter centers, right? So then maybe Minneapolis starts to look attractive in some areas, or Atlanta starts to look attractive, or San Francisco, right? But that's just kind of going to where the organizations are. But right, there's a lot of companies that, they're not going into the office, right? Sometimes they go in 2 days a week or 3 days a week, and others are just totally remote. They're just totally spread out all over the country. So there is kind of that factor to keep in mind, if you're thinking of moving. Yeah.
Fantastic. Daniela, so you have your hand raised.
Hi, thank you so much for hosting this and taking the time to speak with us. And so one of the questions that I had was referring to titles. So like when looking for jobs, what are some titles to look out for that would be an indicator that this is kind of like a CSR type of position?
Yeah. I think if you're thinking of CSR, that would be more out of the office, out of the company, right, that is coming from their global sustainability office,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's got that kind of a language.
Mm-hmm.
You can imagine, say, a business government relations office and having someone who might kind of play that CSR role. But I think the experience is that the CSR folk and the government relation folks generally don't talk to each other. And you can come up with half a dozen reasons why that would actually be a great idea. Because the CSR people have all the stories. And when you're up doing your lobbying and up on the Hill, you want to have a nice story about your company to tell the congressperson or the staffer,
Mm-hmm.
right? But so just the way organizations are, typically they're kind of slotted. So if it's CSR, I think it's really only going to come out of those specific offices. If you're thinking a little more broadly, then there's program analyst, program director, project director. But I think looking under that space of, is there an interest in the collaboration in the sustainability space and engaging the public and the private sector and NGOs? It's that kind of an area that's going to bring that skill set, that's of interest.
And then another question I had was kind of like delving more into like the business government relations
Mhm.
part of the conversation. You mentioned how it's the current administration kind of is having an ear for it and having more like are more willing to listen to that and like talking more about the opportunities within that, something to leverage potentially, especially with like if you have a background in development, like relationships with nonprofits, public
Yeah.
affairs even.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the point I was trying to make about the open ears is that prior to this administration, most people in the space kind of understood the drill and how you went about it and who you gave money to and why you gave the money and then what you would expect and what, right? There was just a routine, but it started really getting tied up because there was so little legislation that there really wasn't anything to tie your action to, right? Like I want to change in the regulation, the way we interpret, X, Y, or Z. So that goes into the authorizing legislation or appropriation, but there was no bills moving, so there's nothing to tie it to. So that seemed to muck everything up. Now there seems much more openness to getting a whole new interpretation or having, Department of Interior completely drop regulations linked to, water quality or something, right? Or give exemptions for. So all I mean is there's a lot of higher payoff for a company to provide more resources, to that effort. And whether they take it on directly, a lot of the firms kind of doing the business government relationships then have contracts with all these different public affairs entities. And that could be a place to look. Those public affair offices tend to be, or many of them, there's around, tend to be kind of younger. It's kind of a go-go mindset. They're always coming up with the new campaign. Someone just hired us. We have to go do this. We have to give them our first draft in 3 weeks. Okay, right? But that does draw upon kind of the skill set, Daniela, that you'd mentioned, right? Understanding the policy, the program, the implications, the stakeholders, and how you might judge success or how people might judge what the company's doing. So that's also another place, that public affairs world, where there may be some interest in opening.
Thank you. And one last question I have is like kind of like you mentioned some of the hard skills
Yeah.
that would be helpful, but like if you have any more that you would like to highlight that are not often talked about that are essential, but also some soft skills that would be great to gather.
Well, that's a really great question. I hadn't thought of it quite that way. So I don't want to say I have nothing to say, but what I've seen is what I've seen is that this is the soft skill side, right? That even if you're younger, relatively speaking, people who can be part of a meeting and can hear what the conversation is and find kind of those key highlight points and then immediately be able to translate it around into some kind of actionable, or what you heard now influences the action that's done. So it's not so much a passive, well, we're just listening and taking notes. It's I'm looking for information that is going to influence how, in fact, we do what we're doing in a different way. And you're capturing it and capturing why and suggesting to move it forward, right? I think that's the one thing, like I say, particularly in some of those areas, there's under a lot of pressure, they're understaffed. And if you have that skill to grab information that helps advance, even if it's just a little bit, it's better than where we were before. And if you're a little more academic oriented like I am, it's like, well, I just heard 5 really interesting points. Let me explain them to you. But and maybe it's interesting, maybe it's not, but it doesn't help move forward, right? Get the report out, have the next conversation. Okay, because of that, we should be calling these 3 people now. I don't know if that's something that you can kind of study and pick up on, or maybe an internship, or maybe an exposure, or maybe it's just experience, once you see it. But I've seen a lot of companies who are willing to rely on people with less experience because they can help move the ball down the field.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
I think that's great advice for almost any line of work.
Yeah, that's probably.
Yeah, that grit, that energy. Mary, it looked like you're about to raise your hand. Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. It's just also interesting to hear this perspective and your knowledge about it. So I wondered if you could say a bit more about, you said, well, I don't think the grant, all of the billions and billions of dollars for grants and how that was, feeding into businesses and shaping the way everything is done, and that you don't see that coming back. And and I'm just curious, what do you see coming back? What world do you see, or do you have a glimpse of anything yet?
Well, I do. I don't know how accurate it is. I kind of feel like this actually has been a pretty big watershed movement, and definitely, um, and maybe centrally in some ways for public administration and public policy. I mean, when people complain about the bureaucracy and the problems that it has and the red tape, people who study bureaucracies and public policy would be like, oh, I've got three more for you, right? Like I could tell you all day long the problems because we know them. But we tend to assume that that's just kind of the way it goes. Like there's no perfect thing. We understand bureaucracies have their weaknesses and we've just learned to go along with it. But that isn't carrying the day anymore. It certainly doesn't carry for business. Businesses don't have discussions where it's like, yeah, we were late on our delivery again. Oh, well, like really nothing to be done about it, right? People get fired, they come in new plans, they hire new contractors, they get a new design, right? They do something. That's not how we've tended to be. So I think there is a chance for people who still, kind of care about the public policy side and delivery is to kind of take the lessons learned, but the new thinking and try to forge a still good, reasonable role for government and kind of say, where is the value add, right? And there's a lot to draw upon in public administration. I mean, if you go back to the new public management, the new public service, the new public governance, these are all kind of treaties around government and what their roles are and what they could be. And it just seems like we're ripe for someone to come up with one more, the new something. But and I'll just use a real quick example. So, right, greenhouse gases, climate change, such a huge issue. Biden administration puts a lot of weight on it in order to get people to come out and vote in order to do something about it. Yet when they had their programs, both in energy and in EPA, they put out a $20 billion grant. So then the different environmental associations in town could get the money and then they would find programs to do it in. It's almost like EPA said, we don't know, we can't write the specs for an RFP. You tell us how smart you are, and then we'll give you the money, and then you go do it. I mean, that's not easy to defend when it's attacked, right? So I do think there is room, and that's what people will be doing is like for the next election and the next wave, here's the role that Department of Transportation should be playing. But I don't think it's going to be like it used to be, right? We're just waiting 3 more years and then Congress will write huge checks back to the agency. I just don't think that's going to happen. So you're going to need like a new rationale around doing it, which could be really fun, exciting work. I'm sure the consulting firms are all trying to think that through and try to work on, what's going to make sense and how you talk about it and how you can explain it to people.
Very interesting. Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, I love your candor. This is wonderful. And this is, I mean, I know I see Melissa's face in there, as we do all this career coaching, it just helps open our eyes and also affirm things that we are messaging to students and alumni. We just have a couple minutes left. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap up? Or any other last words of wisdom, John, that you want to leave?
Well, I'll pick up on the last words. I don't know about the wisdom part. But if you don't have already, again, something that business students do a lot of is they're very active in groups and networking. And you would think that this would be a key area, right, for drawing in people who recently graduated 2, 3 years ago to those who are taking classes. But see it as part of your professional development and you're going to the meetings every month. Like it's just part of the business students do it all the time. And their club activities, are intense. I'm faculty advisor for a few of them. Like they're working all the time. They have assignments they need to do. They're doing pro bono work for companies. They're out there. I would think that would be a great way to try to just start to get involved in learning about what other people are doing. And I just don't mean doing happy hours and networking for jobs, right? Like make it a purpose-based network. So then you're learning stuff and you're learning what other people know and you're just part of some movement of some kind or something. I would think that would probably be the best way to try to pick up in what is obviously a tough situation right now.
John, can we just hit record and just play that over and over and over and over? And what's unfortunate is the people who are here are the ones who are taking advantage of it. We just getting that information out. So I implore all of you here today or anybody else listening to this to not just take this to heart, but to also message this. We say this over and over and over again. So that is a perfect way to wrap up. Very wise words of wisdom for us
Well,
to wrap
and we'll
up.
just say I'm all open if anyone here wants to sign up with Compass, which is our impact investing group, or who's working on a project on biochar, or a group that's working on a green DC water taxi, right, to develop, or what we call building resilience and putting energy technologies into buildings. Like these are all active projects. If any of you are interested, please just drop me a note.
John, would you be able to send this in an email to me so I can send this out? Because we had a couple people that had to go and pop off for class
Sure.
or meetings. I would love to send this out to them. This is exactly the kind of projects we talk to people about. So
Yep, you bet.
I am thrilled. I have been following John and we've been back and forth through the years. So I am thrilled that we were finally able to leverage your expertise to share your insights with our students, our alumni, and staff here so we can all learn with what you're doing. And if there's any way we can continue to support your work, please let us know. We really appreciate this. Was wonderful.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Great questions on your part. And if anyone wants to follow up individually, say, I'll send Denise and Melissa some information of some groups. But if you just want to follow up directly, feel free.
Thank you.